we move now to discussion items for action. First up, 4.1, design contract and proposed project schedule. And Kyle Bilfer and a number of other people are back with us.
I'm actually going to introduce them all. We have Tom Potts, who's the principal with Stilling Architects, our design architect.
Good evening.
Of course, you all know Honorable Judge McGee. And Jody Driggs will be the project manager for Silling for a bulk of this project. And he'll actually, as we start to get into the presentation and look at the massing concepts, Jody will kind of take over the control and point out on the board. So I just kind of wanted to point out some historical details about this project. Looking back at my records, the first space needs study that we did while I was on staff here was presented to the board in July of 2009. So that's when it started going and looking at other courthouses. And since then, we've been through 2 space needs updates. But it was kind of interesting to look at all the people that were on that committee that went through it back in 2009, looking how we were going to expand. I believe only 3 of us are still in our current positions or have an involvement with it now. So just looking back on it to give you all some history, because as we start to discuss this, in terms of we've gone back and reprogrammed everything, and that's what Silling has just had their first contract in place for, is to go back through the programming process with the courthouse staff. And obviously, you've heard some tidbits of that. I've been coming up and giving the board updates. But I wanted to let you know, as we move forward, whether I'm up here with a construction manager at risk, or whether I'm up here with Silling, or whether I'm up here with the courthouse staff, I will most likely be up here every month giving you an update of where we are in the progress. And the reason that is, and you'll understand once we get through this presentation, the actual milestones on the schedule. So just the design schedule, take the construction off of the table at this point. The actual milestones to be met in terms of the design process are going to be strict at best. Meaning if we have to get public input, we've got to hit it right then. And if we need to bring it in front of you and get board approval, we need to. And if we don't, we can't move forward with the next part of the process. And that all impacts when we can start digging across the street. And obviously, I just throw it out based on the presentation I just came to give about the parking deck. Weather and time of year will be a significant impact on this project in terms of your first stages, which is theoretically digging a large hole in the ground, but also, and this will come up later in this presentation, it's the enabling of the current building to accept the future building. So it's not just digging a hole in the ground for the new courthouse. There are certain changes and modifications and temporary and permanent alterations we'll need to make to the existing courthouse annex, the connection to the tunnel, and all of those things that go into it that will need to be enabled or done. So meeting all of our milestones as we start to view the schedules or the proposed schedules, you'll understand why they become so important. And I kind of wanted to just give a little bit of a brief introduction on that. So I will kind of turn it over to Tom. I will tell you that the goal of this is for the design contract to be approved. The design contract is made up of several AIA contracts. Our attorney has reviewed those contracts. This is the first part of the puzzle to actually move forward with design, and you'll see the different contracts that are attached to it and what they mean, because you have different contracts for commissioning, you have different contracts for furniture and equipment, so it's all clearly laid out. But we have already had several meetings with Silling Architects and our attorney to go through all these standard AIA contracts, and they all work off percentages of the actual GMPs or the budgets. So again, I will preface this presentation by saying you need to keep that in mind, that to get to a GMP, you have to do a design. But the cost of the design is related to the GMP. So this circle will come up several times in our discussion, and I wanted to kind of get that out of the way right now. So I will turn it over to Tom, and he can kind of walk you through the programming process and some of our test fit urban response massing studies and show that.
Thank you, Kyle, and good evening. If you would, Lauren, the first slide. Maybe the second slide there. Yeah, so what we'd like to walk through here to just kind of underscore what Kyle was talking about is to give you is my microphone working? Give you an update on our programming process, and then my business partner Jody here is going to walk through a test fit masting study, which we've arrived at. Give you a sense of what the scope of that project means in terms of square footage, how big it is, number of courtrooms, the data that's included in that. Also talk about the schedule that Kyle was talking about. Give you a sense of the rough order of magnitude for the entire project cost, and then that will lead to a discussion about our contracts because they're all related. Good, Lauren. So this slide is just a little bit of a history lesson. We started on our work on April the 19th, I believe. We were in the courthouse for really on site every day for 2 weeks. It was very important for us to be able to observe the court at depth. I think that we attended every single court type that you could have, every type of proceeding that was available and was on the court docket. We had an opportunity to sit through those sessions, perhaps an hour. Sat through an entire jury trial just to see how the court operated. We wanted to truly understand how Cabarrus County operated from a court standpoint. I think there were some discussions with the judges, with some of the staff, with private attorneys, the users. That was a preliminary discussion. Then we had a little bit of a respite on the 24th of May and I think the 6th of June. I think there were a number of courthouse tours that we took, and we took that with the judges, with the staff, and it was walking through those courthouses and getting a sense of kind of the do's and don'ts. What works, what would work well for Cabarrus County, how would the court function, those kind of things, just understanding, really kind of learning from our peers. After that, we came back to the courthouse and started into a second round of questioning and understanding and observations of the space planning needs of each one of the offices, really in order to develop a detailed understanding of space planning needs for the new court facility. Once we had a sense of what that looked like, then we started into actually developing test fit studies. And so test fit studies aren't full designs. They're moving blocks around on the site. It was very important for us to understand the urban fabric of downtown Concord and how this building was going to fit within Concord. And we'll show you that here in a moment. But really began to develop how the building might operate, how big in scale it might be, how it would interact with the site, how it would interact with the existing building, what's usable in the existing building, what spaces do we need. We developed a number of them. You can see I've got it there in red, 5 test fit options. I think there were a little bit more. There was kind of a question mark. So we really did study this early on to try to get the best sense of what the best solution might be. Part of this was doing a number of reviews with the users, questioning whether what we had in the scope was right, accurate, did it work. And then once we got to a place where we felt like we had the best choice, then what we did was we went and we did our rough order of magnitude pricing. So even though your construction manager at risk is not under contract, they were generous enough to work with us and give us their time in pricing this one solution, or actually several solutions, until we got to a place where we felt like this was the best solution for us to move forward. And so we arrived at that favored option in November. And so, Jody, I believe you're prepared here to walk through several slides that give you a sense of what the bigger picture issues of the building at this point.
Great. Thanks, Tom. What I'll say starting off is appropriate design really relies on a conversation. So as we begin to talk about these options. Please feel free to jump in, ask questions, make comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts as we talk through it. You know, as designers and as your architect here, we ultimately have to kind of invest in who you are and take ownership of what this project is about and where it is located. And we've really enjoyed kind of diving in and getting to study and know Cabarrus County and the city of Concord. And one of the documents that we came upon early in our research was this document. This is from the downtown master plan, which was developed for the city of Concord by another firm. It was, I think this is several years old, but it was a great document. Talked about a lot of the history and the past of the city, but also the future direction, opportunities for future development. And in fact, in the middle of kind of the developmental framework portion of this document, even back then, there was already the notion that if this cursor will work, there was a potential project that might be located on the site that we are considering, the parking lot behind the existing courthouse. And that document started to suggest that here is the front door. I'm gonna relinquish control for a minute and maybe go to full screen view. View full screen. Right, there we go. Great, thank you. And so this document started to talk about the positioning of a potential new judicial center and had some relationship with the existing county administrative office building, which we're in now, and the jail building across the street. And you can see there was this kind of triangulation of front doors to become a node for community government. And as Tom suggested, mentioned, we studied multiple options, and this was one of the options we started to look at. And in thinking about a public building of this significance, really that public front door becomes the identity of the place. It's where the major interior public spaces are. It's where those public spaces are in dialogue with what should be meaningful outdoor public spaces. And we saw this maybe as, in a way, turning its back toward the center of downtown Concord and where the future development really wanted to take place. And it was going to be a missed opportunity. And so the preferred test fit option that we really arrived upon is founded upon this idea that the identity of this building can be more engaged with the kind of the heart, the pulse of downtown Concord, and in a lot of ways can continue to be connected to Union Street, but also spur future development onto Church Street and really reinforce the legacy of the courthouse here in Cabarrus County. So do I just click to fast forward? There we go. So this is the kind of a site diagram of how this test fit is working. And for orientation, you see the existing courthouse here near the bottom of the screen. The historic courthouse is located here, the county government center here. And so this dark kind of block represents a new addition to the existing courthouse. And to talk about just some of the pieces of how this is put together, as opposed to locating the entry, which is going to form the identity of this building here on the corner of Church and Corbin, we are suggesting that the new entry of the facility would be located here and start to occupy the area of Means Avenue. And this would be the new public entry that you can see these kind of yellow dotted lines represent pedestrian circulation from the new parking deck being constructed to the page south, as well as pedestrian circulation opportunities from the parking deck in the lower levels of this building and from folks that are circulating between the government office building over to the facility. And this becomes really the front door of the facility. Other kind of points of interest here, this becomes the pedestrian staff entrance to the building as a secondary secure way for staff to enter the facility. And then this red dashed line is indicating where vehicular circulation and service might come into the building, and that would be in the form of secure parking for staff, as well as potential delivery of detained defendants for the court's program. And again, what we really love about this is the notion of creating then a new kind of pedestrian plaza that serves the front door, that continues to be in dialogue with Union Street, just the way the courthouse has always been located on a public place, in dialogue with Union Street, going back to the historic building and the existing courthouse. So as we jump into some three-dimensional imagery, what I want to make sure is clear is that this is not an architectural exploration of character at all. The building materials and details and fenestration and those kinds of things are really a long way away from being developed. But this massing diagram is really meant to help kind of bring that siting diagram to life, help you understand the relationships of the building here in the city, start to get a sense of scale, height, and proportion. And what we've also started to imply here with the notion of kind of solid and then that somewhat transparent kind of skin is just so you can see where we think certain view opportunities are, where there are public spaces within the building that can engage great public spaces outside the building. So this is a bit of an aerial view looking down into what was Means Avenue as a vehicular street, now becoming Means Avenue as a pedestrian plaza, leading to this 1.5 or 2 story kind of entry element that feeds into the building. The bulk of the building that would serve the new judicial functions of the courthouse are in that 4-story kind of long linear element that fronts along Church Street. And then if you can kind of tell, the building as it starts to step down and connect to the existing courthouse steps down into a 3-story volume. And then that connects, and we are using and renovating all of the existing courthouse as well. So looking at that at a little bit more of a pedestrian view or from Union Street, then this becomes the new Means Entry Plaza. Excuse me. Again, the detailing and the design of this plaza is really a long way from being developed. You see green spaces and how much is green and how much is hardscape. How we would really program this space, how the county and the city would use it, how it'd be lit and maintain safety and security and accessibility and maintenance. There's a lot of things to work out here, but again, the notion that the front door becomes kind of the headboard of this grand, beautiful public room that continues to honor and bring some focus to the historic courthouse to the page right. This is a view looking down Church Street, and you see the jail building in the distance, and you're starting to see the other side of this public entry that has a relationship with and a dialogue with Church Street, and pedestrians can kind of flow along and enter that space. You're starting to see the implication or the notion of a vertical circulation element be kind of a vertical marker to kind of anchor this corner of the building. And then in the 4-story kind of body of the building that you see stretching off to the left would potentially be the pre-function spaces, the public circulation spaces along each floor that are feeding into the area where the new courtrooms would be located.
Is there a door that goes in from this side as well as the other side?
Yes, ma'am. There would be doors on this side of that public lobby space
Also
as
from
well
your
as the other.
dots to back, but I wanted to make sure.
Yes, yes.
And again, that would be flushed out in the design, as I've had some discussions with courthouse security about what that would mean in terms of line of sight of security. So that would be one of the issues. I've gotten that same question in terms of how accessible is it from church, meaning are you able to, you have to walk around the whole thing to get in, and some of that's going to fall into security.
This is a more of an aerial view, again, just to kind of maybe get a sense of orientation and general scale. So you see this 4-story kind of element that runs the length of Church Street. It's a large building program. It really, we're able to keep it down at 4 stories by maximizing the length of the site and really moving that entry element out into the footprint of Means Avenue, and then stepping down into that 3-story kind of connector piece as it reaches out and touches the existing courthouse. And then just a bit of a view from the intersection here at Church and Corbin. Again, you're seeing kind of the transparent 3-story element kind of riding above, thank you very much, the streetscape there that would be an opportunity for all of that interior public space, feeding the courtrooms within to really, again, bring transparency to the notion of the delivery of justice here for Cabarrus County, and have something that starts to animate the street with activity, and you would see your peers and your fellow citizens in the court's facility. And then off to the kind of the page left is more of the service-oriented side of the building. Again, remembering from the kind of the site diagramming, this would be the side where secure staff entry would be brought in kind of away from that public front door, and also the vehicular circulation into the lower levels of the building. Any questions about the test fit massing images that you've seen?
So following that up, just to give a sense of some of the data of the court, that's roughly 240,000 new square foot and 72,000 existing gross square foot. So it gives you a total of about 312,000 gross square feet. You can see that the courtroom would have 4 Superior Court jury-capable courtrooms, currently planned for 6 district courtrooms. And then there are 2 future courtrooms. One would be a triage courtroom, and then the potential footprint for 7 courtrooms, whether they're district or superior courtrooms. The office space is what you would expect to have within the judicial, in the courthouse. Judges' suites, clerk of courts, the DA, probation offices, your mediation space, and guardian ad litem. I think that it's important to point out that, as you can see in that last bullet point, there is shell space of 45,000 square feet of expansion that would be built in, that's in basically block area. And the current planning for that means that the second and the third floor of the existing courthouse would be shelled for future use. And there would be 14,000 square, and we would use the lower level and the first floor of the existing courthouse. And then the third floor of the new building would have 14,000 square foot of shell space. So you've got elbow room of 45,000 square feet to grow in the future. In addition to that, every single one of those office spaces is accounted for 30-year projection that is tied to the AOC's staffing, the best that you can have a crystal ball and forecast your population and your staffing and so forth. So there is departmental elbow room, if you will, and then just raw space for future growth. And I think that's really important for this county, given its population growth. And I don't know, Judge, if there's anything that you would like to speak to with regard to some of the elbow room and the spaces that we've got in the building.
Well, thank you. First, I'd just like to thank you all and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I also certainly appreciate your asking the folks on our side of the street to participate in this. And folks have given freely of their time. The clerk's office, the DA's office, the district court judges, security, probation, and lawyers have all been willing to participate. There's a good number of us that travel to 6 courthouses to observe how they work and try to make sure that we also get the best information in terms of what our projected growth is going to be. We've been instrumental in trying to get that from AOC, and I believe they've used data from the National Center for State Courts in helping to come up with that. And so I see our role has been thus far as to help establish the needs or to get them in contact with the people that can provide the data for that. And then to try to work to see that there's a good fit between what the needs are and what is actually built. And I would just like to say I believe everybody on our side of the street is willing to volunteer and help in any way that you all would find to be helpful.
I want to shift gears here and kind of walk through a very preliminary project schedule, and I have 2 of them to show. And so these get a little bit complicated, so I want to keep this as simple as I can. And you can see the basic functions or activities that are there on the left. The top 3 are basically, those are design phases. So you work from schematic design to design development and construction documents. You move from where we are now to something that can be priced and constructed. Each one of those bars, there's an orange bar for design, there is a green bar for pricing where we coordinate with the construction manager at risk, and then there's a blue section which means that's requiring board approval. And this goes back to what Kyle was speaking of earlier, where each one of these steps has a specific, for example, the schematic design phase has 4 months of design, but it's very important for us to get approval so that we can stay on track with the whole intent of, if you look in the purple bar, you can see a little man with a shovel there. The idea that construction wants to happen as early at that particular time And if you kind of drew a line up, you'd see that that's happening, well, there's a date right there. It says August 1st, 2020. And that's really not a good time to be starting to build a building. You'd like to be able to build or start earlier in the year if you could, just to make the best use of the weather. But regardless, if we were able to start on the 1st of March, we've thought through this and said, what would it take for us to be able to get all the approvals necessary, to work with all the user groups, to have approval of the outside of this building, to define it in the way that needs to be, to have this back and forth collaboration with the construction manager at risk, to get us to a place where it could be approved, that this is what we consider to be under a single, what we call guaranteed maximum price construction contract. It would be, according to that schedule, would have us breaking or working on the project, turning it over to the CM on the 1st of August of 2020. You can see also there is a black square up there, which is project funding, which is roughly, about a 60-day window, I think, that you'd have to have. And all of that would kind of occur and come together so that the construction process on the new courthouse would be about a 27-month duration. That last pink component is closeout and commissioning, so that occupancy for the new courthouse under the schedule would be perhaps the earliest that we could do would be December of 2022. Also, you might notice that there's another group of design activity that is occurring there. So if you kind of back up, what we intend to do, we have to know the total price of this project as best we can, all the way back in 2020, before they actually work on renovations of the courthouse. So it's imperative for us to get a guaranteed maximum price starting in the spring of 2020, but also to be able to land the exact price or a reasonable price, the estimate for the courthouse. So we're going to take that design through 85% so that we have enough information so that Messer's construction estimate along with the GMP really qualifies what our project budget is. And then we're going to set the design for the courthouse renovations down while the construction occurs for the new courthouse, and then come back up and pick up the design starting again, according to this schedule, roughly May the 1st of 2022, so that we could finish that design package and then do all of our coordination, pricing, guaranteed maximum price development, funding development, so that we can get to a place where we're then, once the new courthouse is occupied, you completely vacate the existing courthouse so that there's about a year's work for that courthouse, so that the project would be finished, again, according to this schedule, roughly the 1st of 2024. So you can see that it is, that what we're talking about is a 5-year engagement with us as the architectural and engineering firms that would be dealing with the project. So it's a long endeavor between start and completion. There's a couple of other pieces that are in there that I'll point out. The yellow blocks, at some point in time, very early in the process, we have to identify what the real furniture, fixtures, and equipment scope looks like. But that's a preliminary. And then when we start to get closer to the end of construction, at that point in time is when we're going to go out and we're going to finish our design and procurement packages for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, so that all that can be ordered, placed in the building when we occupy it. So there are 3 separate pieces, if you will, of that furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. I realize this is a little bit complicated detail, but it is a kind of a complicated process. Having shared this with you, I want to open up the next, or go to the next slide. And this one contemplates what happens if the schedule, if our start date moves. So if you'll notice that start date on this construction, or this design phase, is 2 months later. So that's May 1st of this year. And so what does that do then? It starts to push our schedule out, and it really, it puts our beginning of the construction process in jeopardy. So at this point, what we're considering is the contemplation of the schedule would be, or the delivery process would be altered so that we would provide 3 separate packages. And that first construction package, or GMP, I will note, this schedule shows 2 GMPs in red, but actually a third GMP, which would be for what we call an enabling construction project. So that would be the demolition of parts of the courthouse, excavation of the site, site utilities, some foundation work and so forth. It would be a much smaller package, but would allow us to make use of the early construction period, perhaps April the 1st, 2020, an early start versus that much later start that you saw on the previous schedule. So it's our opinion that this schedule would serve the project better at this point, to be able to have 3 separate contracts with Messer, or your construction manager, excuse me.
The question the board might have is, why would we have to start in May versus March if we're here in front of you in February and we'll go in front of the regular session to vote on their contract? What that involves is the abandonment of means and just what is the status of means. If we will not have city approval for the abandonment of means and different agreements worked out with the private owners, the 2 owners that are on that street, right? We will not have that by March 1st. So with that being said, if we were to release Silling Architects to design on March 1st, they would be designing a footprint and spending the money designing a footprint that we actually in reality don't know 100% without a doubt that we have. And if we weren't able to get it and had to come back, that work would be wasted and we would have paid for it, and we will pay again to redesign it in a different way.
Well, let me add to that. We have had preliminary meetings, very positive meetings with those adjacent owners who are affected by the closure of means, but the public is also affected by that. So the city goes through a public process to consider that. We've also, with our attorney and theirs, had discussions on that process, and we feel good about that, but it is still a public process and needs to be approved, and there is some risk that it might not be. So that's where we look at that. We have hesitancy in starting full design without knowing that that will happen. And again, those meetings with the property owners were very good, but they have legitimate concerns. So we are moving forward very quickly in addressing those concerns and looking at how we can alleviate them, to make sure that it works not just for us in terms of this project as it's been envisioned, but it also that it works for the city of Concord and it works for those adjacent owners.
So that is what spawned the design of this second schedule. And keep in mind, in the original schedule, when we were just going to start in March, still starting construction in August wasn't 100% the most favorable. Obviously, if you could start a little bit earlier, we gain time in terms of weather and good construction months, especially for what we're doing. So we had been discussing this early site, this enabling package from the beginning. So it turns it from a construction manager at risk contract that has 2 GMPs, it essentially changes it to 3 GMPs. So you're getting started earlier. So we were always going to have 2 GMPs, and now the option is on the table for 3 GMPs. And we have met, county staff has met, and we've talked with our finance director and talked about that. And it would require us to go out for debt earlier than we had originally planned for this. But there's also ways that there are certain, I guess, regulations and that we can work with to facilitate that. So it wasn't a stopping block in terms of moving forward.
What is the submittal schedule for Concord? What is best case scenario?
So we would go before them with a resolution, I believe it is, Mr. Cook, that he's preparing in March, and they would set a public hearing in April to consider this.
And all of this schedule facilitates the next contract that I'll be back up in here next month when we start looking at the construction manager at risk contract.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, if there are no further questions about the schedule here.
is there a,
Yeah, just go back, so the three GMPs, it was gonna be 2, 3, that's with you guys. Right? And then there's gonna be
The idea would be that the project is probably best served with 3 GMPs with Messer as the construction manager.
yes, a GMP
Okay.
contract is with the construction manager.
okay, well, that, somehow you lost me right at the very end, so just back up for just a second. I guess ultimately where I'm going, I may be jumping ahead, what's the dollar amount difference between, if you add up the 2, here's where we were gonna be. Now we're gonna add up 3, that's where we are.
Right.
So you don't have to answer that if you're getting to it, but I guess what I really want to make sure I'm following is, so the architecture and engineering that you guys are going to do, all of what we're seeing is under one contract with these guys? Or is it
No,
one
it's-
now and one later? Or is
No,
it-
it's multiple contracts. The design is a certain percentage to bring it up to the 85%. They also have a separate contract that is for FF&E, the furniture and the equipment.
Okay, right.
And then they have a separate contract that is for augmenting construction administration, meaning being on site and physically saying yes or no. So I guess, I think what you're asking, or even if this is not what you're asking, we do need to address it. By going with this early site and enabling package, there is an impact to the design contract costs. Okay, there is. It goes up because it means they have to start construction administration earlier. They have to come do construction administration earlier than they had planned while all this site work and enabling is done, then go back and then come back when they start to build the building. So it flips the rotation, and there has already been an estimate done on that cost.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm confused about, why is the CA under a different contract?
It is not. There's additional services under the contract, which is augmented. We'll get into that here momentarily.
The next slide details what you're
Okay.
asking, the different breakdowns of the
I
contracts.
think what's important to think about with respect to what we have to do under this model is exactly what Kyle said. We have to turn on our construction administration services earlier in the game and longer. So that takes more people, more time, so forth. There's also a level of complexity in managing 3 different contracts that you would hold with the construction manager at risk. It's the idea of keeping track of paperwork and how it overlaps and the number of people involved. Just the level of complexity gets greater when you're managing 3 different construction contracts under the same project, in a sense, is what I'm saying. So.
Okay, no, I don't disagree with that. I just was not clear why we would have to have more than one contract with you guys.
We're right there,
Okay.
so okay. So before we get, that will be the next slide, but the first thing I want to talk about here was the rough order of magnitude,
Tom,
entire project cost.
Can we go back just for 1 second, Tom?
Sure.
Kyle, this would probably be for you. In the area there where the CMR construction, the new courthouse, it looks like it starts in April of 2020. What's that little section there? It's not coded in the bottom of the bar graphs.
That's the actual, that's literally starting to dig in the dirt. That's the early site package right there.
Is that
That's
what
the
you
s-
talked, you
Yes.
prefaced the
Yeah.
conversation about?
I think probably the term we've been using in the meetings that we're having with the architect and the construction manager at risk is, we're calling it an enabling project. It's pretty much enabling us to have the current courthouse ready to
Okay.
be able to accept this new building.
Well, there's no explanation on there, and I seen that. I'm saying, well, what, that 2 or 3 months, so that's what that was. I understand it now. Thank you.
As Kyle said earlier, we have a little bit of a circular kind of reasoning here where our contract is based on actual construction dollars. And so right now, you have to start with something. And again, this goes back to that test fit study that has been finished at this point, which shows a $100 million construction value. It's broken down with roughly about $3.5 million for site development, about $81.5 million for the new portion of the building, and roughly $15 million to renovate the existing building. So that is that dollar figure, that $100 million, will form the basis of our basic services compensation. So if you can kind of put a pin in that, and for a second we'll walk through these, quote, soft costs. There is furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, currently right now estimated at $3 million. And again, this is a rough estimate. Clearly, as we work our way through it, it gets more defined. The audiovisual equipment that would be in the building, primarily courtroom audiovisual equipment, is approximately $1 million right now. As you can see, the next two numbers are about our basic services design fee. The design portion of the fee is 5.75% of that $100 million. The basic construction administration is 1.25% of that $100 million. And then, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, well, part of that 5.75 million has to do with putting it in chunks, which I think is about being able to pay for it out of your current funding mechanism, which is part of the reason why it's broken down into pieces the way that it is. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The next piece is the augmented construction administration. This is, if you're familiar with AIA documents, this is technically what the American Institute of Architects calls an additional service. So there's basic services that architects and engineers typically perform during the construction phase, and that is spelled out in your contract. But it doesn't include on-site project representation by the architects and the engineering staff. So in basic services, typically what we do is we in terms of our site representation, what it speaks to is being on-site at intervals that are appropriate to the construction process. And typically what that means is that we would be on-site, have our staff on-site probably twice a month. In talking with Messer, and certainly we understand that given the complexity and the scale of this building, being on-site twice a month in support of this project is not enough. And so this augmented construction administration, the $468,000, is a number where what we're trying to do is match our additional trips to the site based on the percentage of completion of the building. So at the very beginning of the project, the construction activity isn't that rigorous. Typically, a person on site several times a month during demolition and excavation and site utilities would be generally sufficient. But the more gets in place from a construction standpoint, the more there is for us to look at, the more there is for us to work out with the contractor. And so that additional construction administration services starts to ramp up from that point. And I've got a little bit of a chart in here on the next slide that speaks to that. So the other contract would be a furnitures, fixtures, and equipment design contract, and that is $320,000. It's roughly a percentage of those two. It's 8% really if you did the math of those two pieces, the $300,000 and the $1 million. So it's 8% of those numbers. There's a $10,000 bucket for reimbursable expenses. There is a third-party estimator. Now, this is not in our contract. This is the county would contract directly for that piece. And then there's third-party testing, which by code, we aren't allowed to do the testing. You have to hire someone to test concrete and steel and so forth. There's budgeted for $300,000. The county's already spent about $100,000 or close to it for some pre-design site engineering, such as surveying phase 1 and phase 2 and asbestos, and also is there some geotechnical information there as well. When the building gets finished, we're right now budgeting $300,000 for commissioning. That can be part of our contract and is included in our contract submittal. You can have commissioning by a third party. We just have it included in ours at this point in time. There's $140,000 for the county would pay directly. We have a separate contract for construction imaging. That's so that you can take particular process photos, so you have a visual record. That, again, that's not in our contract. That's something that the county would separately procure. And then there's roughly $2.4 million, a rough estimate right now, that has to do with the property acquisition and utility relocation for Means Avenue.
And that's my number that I put in there. We do have utilities on both sides of the courthouse annex and then on Means. I put that number in to handle both. That is a shot in the dark, and I think it's an extremely high shot in the dark. And again, we have not pursued the conversations to iron out those numbers right there.
So right now, just a thumbnail, again, 15 million and change in soft cost and holding about a $5.6 million contingency. So a project that's just slightly north of $120 million. If we jump through that too quickly, but
Before we jump to that, so that's based on, what did you call it, the enabling schedule? I'll call it early site work.
The enabling schedule would
Waiting on Concord, having our public hearing, let's just think positive, we get that approved, and that's the second schedule, the number right there. So if you back up and say, well,
that's the first schedule.
that's the first,
this one's
yeah.
the first one.
Right, and
Oh,
there's
more to come.
No. This was kind of done at the last minute. There's
Okay.
about a $10,000 a month delta. If we had to turn on our early site package, enabling package, and we have to do 6 more months of construction administration, it's about $10,000. It's $10,000 a month delta difference over what you're seeing right there.
Okay, that's what I was after.
And that would go in the augmented construction administration
Yeah.
column. So the 468 would increase. And I've already shared that with the finance director, that would be an option if we end up on the second enabling schedule.
Okay.
This might speak more to the different contracts that would be in place with Silling, which is, again, what it's being brought to you in terms of your vote is the actual owner and architect agreement. Tom, you can go ahead.
Sure. It would be an AIA B-133. It's the standard form of agreement between the owner and architect for a construction manager at risk contract. As Kyle said, I guess we've worked through a lot of the review process with the county attorney. There's some slight modifications to it at this point.
Yes, we actually want to modify one of the sections that has to do with dispute resolution, so it matches the same type of dispute resolution that would be used for the construction manager at risk contract, which again, you won't get to see that till next month, but it would match the same type that we would have with the design.
So the next 2 bullet points, the basic AE design services and the basic AE construction services are basic services. That's all one contract for the B-133. But the accounting or the compensation calculation just says that it's split up at 5.75% for the design services and 1.25% of the building construction cost. So, and again, that's basic services. You can see in that top bar, just everything that you would expect for basic engineering services for a building of this stature, of this level of complexity, and all of the components that are necessary in this building would include all of our subcontracts with our consultants, civil, landscaping, structural, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, lighting, communications, so forth. This kind of a little bit of a repeat, but the basic AE construction services, again, it's that, what do we do there? That's this day-to-day administration and the connection between the construction company and all of our design team members, so that we are in constant, probably daily contact as we work our way through the construction process, where we have somebody in our office who is facilitating just the entire engine moving. There's a host of submittals, so there's a lot of paperwork that we process once the project is in, once the construction manager starts to buy out their contracts with their subcontractor. There's an entire submittal approval, review process, and then there's some back and forth. Sometimes those submittals, what they provide us doesn't work. Sometimes they have to resubmit. We have to answer questions with regard to how we, the changes that are necessary and so forth. The contractor, the construction manager is going to ask throughout the project. They will provide a number of requests for information or RFIs. So it's our job to be able to respond to those RFIs, and we'll be doing that over really a 3-year window, 2 years plus for the construction of the courthouse, and 1 year or thereabout for the construction of the existing courthouse. We will process and approve pay applications on a monthly basis during this phase. And then the basic services are those site visits that we spoke to, where we have somebody here, at least one or if not two people on site, and you can see that number is 72 times. So roughly 3 years, about twice a month, 72 visits to the site. And then there is this augmented AE construction services. And again,
I'm sorry to interrupt, the 72 times, does that include an OAC meeting?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I assumed it did, but it doesn't specifically say that.
Right. So this augmented AE construction services are those additional site services. So you can see that this is still part of the basic contract. It's just an additional services within that contract. And you can see that construction phase, as it starts to get more intense, 33 to 50% construction complete, we estimate there's probably about a 6-month period of time there where there will be 40 additional man hours. So typically that's several additional trips during that phase. And then between the 50 and 75% complete, you can see there's about a year of 120 additional man hours per month. How we split that up, we want to keep a little bit of elbow room in that, because we want to be able to tailor that additional service to the actual construction process and what's happening. So this is just an estimate of those additional man hours during that phase that would be needed. And then finally, between 75 and 100%, about 6 months of 60 additional man hours toward the back end of it. So it's most intense during that 50 to 75% period. Again, underneath this AIAB 133, there's a separate contract for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment as an additional service, which is 8% of your total FF&E value. And I think that's the sum total of the agreement.
Correct.
And so,
And again, not all of that is in one fiscal year. That's spread out, and that would, part of these costs would be represented in something that we would go out for debt financing on as we got farther down the line. Are there any questions about the percentages or the schedule per se and guidance in terms of us pursuing?
Just make a quick comment. The percentages part, I don't ever really have to deal with that part. So whether they're in line or not, my background I don't have that. I can tell you, just a quick comment, that typically speaking, AIA documents are generally viewed to be very fair to both sides. So I mean, I'm glad that that's where we're going and that's what we're using. And what you've got shown, it looks like it covers everything. I don't see anything that is not there. I think you've got the communications and building. So I think what you're showing us is typical on a project of this size and magnitude of what the design firm has to do. The CA work, it's very expensive, but it's necessary. Kyle can't run around and answer all of that. If something comes up and the contractor in the field has a question about your design, well, guess what? You got to answer. And so, and that does take time, but that's part of the way your field works. So the other, just quick comment though, and first meeting, and we'll tell you up front, if there's a flaw in the design, we're also coming back to you, right? So, yes, if if the contractor has a question, has a problem, and it turns out that it's on the design side, it's very important to us to make sure that we have a partner that's going to step up and say, yep, we'll take full ownership of that. So, anyway, don't want to put a damper on the first meeting, but you got to get that out.
Just get that out.
Yeah.
I just have one quick question, just for clarity, and that, I guess it's the slide before that one there, where we had the breakdown of the cost, the augmented construction administration, 468. Is that what that additional augmented
Yeah.
services is? Is that
It
what
is.
that is?
That 468 is then, if you'll go back to the next, so, yeah, that group right there, Commissioner.
Yeah, that augmented, that portion of the hours, that's where the 468 came in.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
I'm with you.
And that would increase if we go to the early site package, the
Sure.
enabling package.
And what you said, 10,000 a month?
Approximately $10,000 a month.
And that's based on need, right? Or when you say 40 additional during those different phases, if you don't need to come in, you won't come in, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think, again, what we want to do is be able to tailor that elbow room to the project construction schedule. I will say this about, your reference about, what's the going rate for, a design fee for a project like this. This is priced because of its level of complexity, and it is complex. And you saw earlier in the schedule that, we have a 5-year relationship that we're talking about here. A number of firms that are being involved throughout the a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of time. In addition to that, there's a component of this in the relationship with the construction manager at risk. This is just the nature of the way that this project goes, is there's an extra layer of collaboration and meetings and communication and time in managing that whole construction manager at risk project. There's another body at the table. There's another whole series of protocol that you have to deal with, which you don't typically find if it's what they call a traditional design, bid, build contract. You don't have the contractor sitting there at the table during pre-design. You're doing all of that work kind of in a vacuum, and then you hard bid the project. So that whole area of collaboration doesn't exist in a CMR, construction manager at risk contract. So that adds a level of complexity. The very fact that you have 2 buildings that you're dealing with here, that you have this phased design and phased construction, it's just the level of complexity that you're dealing with. The courthouse by its nature it's not an office building. It's already a complex building. So the types of specialties that you have to get into with security, audiovisual and so forth, there's a certain level of complexity in designing that. So I believe that this percentage is very fair, and given just the duration of the project, the folks that are involved, and the level of complexity that we're dealing with.
I think just from staff's perspective, to date, our dealings with Cillian Architects and our dealings with Messer Construction has been outstanding. And the collaboration with our staff and keeping Kyle and Jonathan moving forward, but then also between the two of them, the communication has been fantastic to date. So we expect nothing less as we move through this, so.
And you were talking about the percentage, and both Blake and myself and Liz all were on the school board at some point. And, obviously, schools don't cost what this is costing. And the complexity is not there either. But the percentage is very much fair and in line, just for my little 2 cents worth. The only difference that I see, is a couple of little things where you got an extra expense here and an extra expense there. And with the school contracts, most of the time, it's just a rate. That's it, 5%, 7%, whatever it might be. But yours broken down with the 1 1/4 for a portion and then the 5 3/4 for another portion. which you're looking at, what, 7% that way. But all in all, though, you know, I'm pleased that we're moving at a pace that we are. And only thing that sort of grieves me a little bit is when we get it all done, it'll be in 2024. I'm not sure that I'll be around that time. That's a long ways from now. But obviously in 2022, our terms end, especially mine and Diane's and Blake's. But maybe we'll be around to see all that happen and celebrate that, you know, so we'll see. Thanks, guys.
Okay, additional questions? I think that means we absorbed all of that.
Okay, so I will be coming in front of you in the regular session, asking for the approval to initiate the contract. And based on the conversations we've had here today, to initiate that contract, we are going with the site-ready enabling early project, meaning we would not turn Silling loose to start design in March 1st before, knock on wood, we had a lot of positive feedback in terms of means. Is that correct?
That is my interpretation,
Okay.
yes.
That's not written out in the agenda item, and I just want to make sure that with everything we've said tonight, we've been trying to be very transparent in every single thing that's gone on. So I want to make sure that that's the way we should proceed.
I guess I'm going to circle back to my original comment was what if the schedule shifts to 2 months and we're doing what we can do, the early site work, well, what's the cost of that is X. Well, if we just, instead of December of 2021, 22, I mean, if everything just moves 2 months, I'm not sure why is that a hard end date that we're looking at to then justify what we're trying to figure out whether we want to spend on the front end? Maybe I should have asked that to begin with. So does Kyle's looking like that doesn't make any sense?
No, I think, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the advantage is that the longer window of construction time for that site work, that we're starting earlier with more favorable conditions. So the benefit comes at the beginning by being able to start the site work earlier.
It really, whether it's March the 1st or May the 1st, I think the target is to hit an early enabling package, site package, whatever you want to call it, just because it gives Messer a greater opportunity to do some work in the spring and the summer of 2020. And the further that you delay
At
that.
a cost, and I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, what, that's a number that we are gonna have to, I mean, I guess when we fish
Yeah,
through
so
here, that we
the
need to
question
know
is,
what
if it were 6 months earlier, let's say, and that added $60,000 to our design by $10,000 a month, does that $60,000, is that $60,000 meaningful? Is that investment make Messer's construction less expensive? Does it make their pre-construction services less expensive? All of those questions. I don't know, is it fair for, can we?
Well, we can bring up, we have Steve Kekis from Messer, and he is here today to see what this meeting was like, and I'm sure we can ask him that question. I think what he will probably tell you is that you would see a higher contingencies carried in their GMPs because of starting at the later time.
I would let him come up and talk.
Yeah,
Okay?
bring him up. Mr. Chairman, I hate to bog us down, but I think this is an important piece of the puzzle.
Pretty important investment.
Thank you all for having me here. Really what we're talking about by doing that early package is advancing the construction, so in the savings of money, instead of starting where you're going to be into heavy winter or heavier winter where you're going to have rains and protection, it allows us to get the construction started and protected so we can go through the winter saving money. The other thing you're going to save money on is buying out packages earlier with the inflation and with the time durations to try to advance that. And there'll be a savings in that as well. To sit here today and tell you what that dollar would be, I cannot do that. But there are other inherent savings that will come through this as well.
Steve, could you explain buying out packages, since that we haven't brought your contract up in front of them yet?
Sure. So once we get to the GMP phase, the guaranteed maximum price phase, we'll finish the construction documents. You'll have a guaranteed max what that phase of the work's going to cost. We need to, as a team, work together, finish the construction documents, then put that out in the marketplace under the public bidding rules, taking the bids in, and then awarding those packages. That's the buyout process, so we can allow those packages to proceed. The sooner we get to those, the more economics we can build in, the more things we can try to save money with by doing that.
And what he's referring to is the current escalation in the market.
Yes, sir.
And every month that goes by, how much that increases.
Okay. All right, so just to wrap it up, as far as I'm concerned, in your professional opinion, is it worth $60,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's well.
If it was my money, I'd be spending it. Yes, sir.
Other questions?
Good, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it certainly is a project that we have talked quite a bit about over quite a long period of time, so it's exciting to see it get moving.